We get caught up in these miraculous events of the Bible and quickly discard them as being untrue because we don't see anything like that today. So we conclude that the Bible isn't reliable. Take, for example, how can a man and woman way beyond childbearing years conceive and have a child? It's impossible, and yet it happened. Because only God can do the impossible, which makes it a miracle, and by its very nature, it won't happen again, otherwise it becomes normal. Get ready for the impossible. Welcome to a beginner's commentary to the book of Genesis, chapter 15. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to this teaching series. Hey, we're being sponsored by MichaelLawsonSpeaks.com, where you can get this captivating unisex Christian hoodie. It is the perfect blend of faith and fashion for individuals like yourself who appreciate the essence of Christian streetwear. Or this Christian character traits backpack that is part of the periodic table of character traits book collection, which is all about character from a biblical perspective, mug as well, each sold separately, of course. So get yours today at michaellawsonspeaks.com. Now, let's get into chapter 15 with verses 1 through 4. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, "Do not fear, Abram. I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great." But Abram said, "Lord God, what will you give me, since I am childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus?" Abram also said, "Since you have given me no son, one who has been born in my house is my heir." Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "This man will not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir." Let's talk about a promised son. Take note of how the Lord had to tell Abram to not fear and then reassure him that he is his shield and his reward shall be very great. A couple of things stand out. First, why did the Lord have to tell Abram to not fear? And why is his reward very great? For what? First, it must have been awe-consuming to have the Lord appear in a vision, which would indicate that Abram was wide awake. So he saw something that would strike fear in anyone. But the Lord quickly reassures him that he is a shield to him, or his protection. Now, why is Abram's reward very great? Is it because he won the battles? No, not even close. Is it because of his faith in the Lord? Well, it was never, ever about anything Abraham did. It was and always will be the condition of our hearts being bent towards God with complete trust. Next, we see Abram jump at the opportunity to ask of the Lord, since his reward will be very great. And in that time, the most important thing a man could have was a male child. Continuing with verses 5 through 7. "And he took him outside and said, 'Now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them.' And he said to him, 'So shall your descendants be.' Then he believed in the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess it. And now for the unnumbered promise. This is where it starts, where Abram is counted as righteousness or being in right standing with the Lord. So that means that before this, the Lord was prophesying that Abram would trust him. Imagine trying to count the number of stars. Science has made attempts and even calculated what that number may be, but it's impossible to count them. And that was the whole point of the Lord showing Abram and asking him to count them, because it's not possible, and therefore it will be impossible to count the number of his descendants. Here's what we do know today, that Abraham is the father of three major religions: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Now, check out the promise of the land, that there are already people living there and possessing it. But these people are also exceedingly wicked, which is why the Lord called and brought Abram out of Ur of the Chaldeans, because he knew that Abram would trust, follow, and obey him, unlike the current inhabitants. Moving on with verses 8 through 11. Excuse me. But he said, Lord God, how may I know that I will possess it? So he said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Then he brought all these to him, cut them in two, and laid each half opposite the other. But he did not cut the birds, and the birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abram drove them away. So let's explore the covenant in the making. Notice how Abram was asking the question from a position of doubt. But was it a position of doubt, or was it a position of, I know this will happen, but how will I know when I will possess it? It's very different. Now, to these strange verses, the reason they are strange to us is because we are reading through our 21st century Western cultured eyes and mindset. I realize it's hard not to, but we must remember that this was a Middle Eastern culture from almost 3,800 years ago. Okay, so what is the significance of these animals, and why 3? A simple examination of biblical gematria shows us that the number is the divine, for divine wholeness, completeness, and protection. Therefore, this is a perfect and complete covenant. But why only a turtle dove and young pigeon? Some things I just don't know the answers to. Continuing with verses 12 through 16. Now, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. Then God said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, You shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. Then in the fourth generation, they will return here, for the wrongdoing of the Amorite is not yet complete. So let's break down the prophecy of bondage. Did you catch that terror and great darkness fell upon Abram? This speaks to the prophecy that was shown how his descendants will be in slavery for such a long time. Can you imagine how frightening that must have been to be shown that right after you were told about having so many descendants that you can't count, and how this large amount of land would also be your descendants? How terrifying it must have been to have seen all of that. But then to also see and know that they will come out with many possessions. The vision didn't end there, because the Lord also showed Abram his death, albeit a peaceful one. The fact that he will be buried at a good old age speaks to Abram being around to see many of his descendants. What about the part that says, for the wrongdoing of the Amorite is not yet complete? That tells us that the Lord is patient, because there is a 400-year period where Abram's descendants will be enslaved, and yet the Amorite do not choose to turn from their exceedingly wicked ways and turn to God. So when people say that God is some monster for wiping out nations and whatever nonsense they spew, all it shows is that they haven't read the Bible in context, and more importantly, God hasn't opened their eyes to his truths, because they refuse to acknowledge creation that's right in front of them. Lastly, we see another time where God showed his patience when he allowed 120 years for the ark to be built by Noah, so that many would turn from their wickedness and be saved from the impending flood. But alas, no one took the offer and instead perished. Continuing with verses 17 through 21. Now it came about, when the sun had set, that it was very dark, and behold, a smoking oven and a flaming torch appeared, which passed through between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenite, the Kenizzite, the Kedmonite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Rephaim, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Girgashite, and the Jebusite. I love this part of the covenant. It's confirmed. Remember, Abram, he's in a deep sleep, and if we know anything about us human beings, we break promises all the time. Many times without any outside pressure, simply because we no longer want to keep our word, because whatever it is no longer is a benefit to us. Therefore, the Lord cannot make a covenant with a human being who is prone to lie and is unable to fulfill their part of an agreement. And before you say that you're different, you probably are. But have you seen our legal system? People will argue and sue to get out of contracts all the time. Now, notice that a smoking oven and a flaming torch appeared, which passed between the pieces. During that time and in that culture, that is how people made covenant promises with each other. Two people would come to an agreement and then take an animal, cut it in two, And then the two parties would walk between the halved carcasses, which meant that whoever would break the covenant would be subject to the same fate as the animal they are walking between. Essentially saying, there will be bloodshed. So, with that complete understanding of the making of this covenant and mankind and the animals, it's pretty easy to see that the Lord can't walk through the carcasses with Abram, who has already lied about his wife Sarai. So that's why he passed out. And the Lord himself is walking between the pieces in the form of a smoking oven and flaming torch. Now, what do these two things even mean? Well, the flaming torch may symbolize the divine presence of the Lord as the fire by night that will happen during the Exodus. I don't want to get ahead of myself. And the smoking oven may be speaking to the animal sacrifices that will be instituted later. Oh, and then we get to the promised land that has a lot of different inhabitants, and none of them are good. We're going to find out in the next book called Exodus, which I don't want to cover here yet, but that's because they were exceedingly wicked, and the land was no longer fit for them. Their time was up. Wow, can you believe it? We just finished chapter 15 with only 35 more chapters to go. Hey, I do want to hear from you. Are you getting anything out of this teaching? Is it blessing you? What questions do you have for me? Is there anything I need to clarify? Leave a comment. Let's engage. And on that, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance towards you and give you peace. Amen. See you in the next video.